Someone to do with the role of tourism in terms of reaching out well-being shops. They're on the camera. Okay, you're monitoring the cover, right? Okay, our main concern is to do with sound. Okay, so it's basically enough. And if we're good, whenever we do, let me know.
I'll just say. And are we almost finished? I'm allergic.
Silence descends into
it's just one that was second one. Just think, it's that horrible little
Yeah. Have you seen the house?
yeah, there's something about it. Used to be a renowned I'm just kind of waiting to make sure that our live feed is working, and then we'll start. So apologies for the delay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Technology is always a friend.
Does it say
We're just recording. Okay, so maybe put a note because it might be. I know at least one person at a time they can follow the lead.
Yeah, at the moment it's just me, so yeah.
Right. So, are we good to start then? I think we are. Very good. So we're not live streaming this event. We're recording it for you. So I hope that's okay.
You are.
We are.
Just going to the slightly different place.
We are through a slightly different place. So hopefully people will be able to follow it. But welcome those of you who are in this room, and welcome those of you who are somewhere, not here. First of all, I'd really like to thank the Faculty of Arts and Creative Industries for funding this event and giving us the opportunity to have what I'm sure will be a really stimulating conversation. Diversity has been at the centre of Middlesex University's strategic plan, and moreover the Standing Conference of University Drama Departments, the Subject Association for Theatre in Higher Education in the UK, of which our department is a member, has set up a working group to analyse the levels of diversity in its member departments, and their work is also ongoing. So as an institution, but also as a member of the UK higher education community, we're very interested in diversity. And more widely, of course, campaign groups such as Act for Change Project have brought a lot of public attention to the question of representation of disabled and ethnic minority performers and practitioners in mainstream theatre, for instance. And the debate around gender representation at the highest level of our theatre institutions is still a very hotly debated topic. The issue of diversity in performing arts is indeed of crucial importance. I think it's an existential issue for us, for the future of our disciplines. In evolutionary terms, genetic diversity is fundamental for the survival of a species. And so in an environment where funding for the arts is decreasing, the performing arts will need to embrace diverse practices and people if it is to survive at all, if it is to adapt and thrive. So this afternoon, the lens of dramaturgy will be used to offer a focus on this issue of diversity by looking precisely at how it is constructed and construed narratively and aesthetically or even politically in British performing arts today. The roundtable will address the topic of diversity in the theatre from different perspectives, asking if and how diverse dramaturgies work to challenge, oppose, or perhaps reinforce or confirm public perceptions and discourses. Just a couple of definitions here so that we know what we're talking about, because everybody has a sort of different understanding of these words, and I'm sure more understandings will emerge, a diversity of those. But diversity is understood to encompass not only a variety of self-identification among practitioners, but also a diversity of practices, a diversity of processes, of budgets, of organizational structures and timescales in terms of rehearsals, for instance. And dramaturgy in this context is understood to be the series of processes, often but not necessarily narrative, by which the relationships between the elements of a performance are articulated and mediated for audiences. So diverse dramaturgies encompass practices which may overtly seek to address questions of representation of a self-identifying group, but not necessarily that it might simply embody those relationships. The event will be divided in two parts. We'll have at the start we'll have a conversation among our guest speakers, and then we'll open to the audience here and through the live feed. If there's anybody out there, through comment boxes on YouTube or whatever medium we're using now, I'm not sure. If you're on Twitter, please use the hashtag #DiverseDramaturgies if you want to talk about the event or comment on it. So on to our guests, whom I also like to thank profusely on behalf of the Directing and Dramaturgy Research Cluster. Thank you for coming. I have my little cue cards here, so I'm very proud of them. So Pippa Hill is a literary manager of the Royal Shakespeare Company. And part of her role is to commission and develop new plays and writer-led projects at the RSC, to work on edits of classical texts, and to commission translations and adaptations. Finn Kennedy is a playwright and artistic director of Tamasha, a touring theatre company producing new plays inspired by the diversity of our globalized world. Marcelo Sanchez-Camus, to my immediate left, is a scenographer, live artist, performer and director, a creative practitioner whose work explores public spectacles, social systems, the body politic, and urban imagination. And he'll surely redefine himself. We had billed Playwright and performer Modupe Salu to come here and be with us today. Unfortunately, she broke her leg in a performance and she's immobile. Her doctor told her she was not allowed to travel. We are delighted, though, to have with us Modupe Salu, who came at short notice and saved us, and she's brilliant. She's a young performer and theatre maker whose show I Can't Breathe, inspired by the death of Eric Garner at the hands of New York Police Department, has earned her the Buzz Goodbody Director Award and the Spotlight Most Promising Actress Award at the National Student Drama Festival this year. So please welcome our guests, and I'd like to start by passing on the baton to whoever would like to speak first. Pippa, why don't you start?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Actually, over the last couple of years, quite a lot of my work at the Royal Shakespeare Company has been looking at non-writer-led processes and seeing where that leads us. So actually, it's quite a mixed brief at the RSC. We've got a large number of writing-led projects, and we've also got a large number of non-writing-led projects. And one of the most recent developments there that we've been working on since Erica Wyman joined the Deputy Artistic Director is having all of the research and development of the company under one umbrella, which is at the other place, which we opened this year. And that's really fascinating in terms of diversifying the process, because what it means is that you have all of your R&D happening in one place, and you can therefore enable quite a lot of cross-pollination in terms of artists who are working together. And sometimes those are marriages that we've broken, and sometimes they are accidental and delightfully so. But that's something that we are particularly focused on, is diversifying the process of how we develop shows. We've got 3 stages at the Royal Shakespeare Company. The largest one's a 1,000-seat plus stage, the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, and then next door is the Swan, which is around 500 seats, also thrust stage. And this summer we've just opened our studio theatre, which is around 200 seats, and it's fully flexible. So we've got quite a large range in terms of the lead-in time. So the development of lots of different. We've got about I've got 48 artists under commission at the moment, all at different stages in the process. But we've also got a large number of projects, around 30, which are speculative. So there are artists that have approached us on spec and said they have an idea that they wanted to develop, and they've asked us to support them in that development, which might be a week-long workshop, or it might be longer, whatever they need. So it's quite a broad range in terms of number of projects and the different processes that they're engaged in.
I can imagine the time demands for that are quite large. If you're dealing with this many artists and the different processes and people coming in and approaching you, how much of your time is spent in filtering this?
Yeah, we set up quite a good system for that. There's a small team, which is myself, Erica, Griselda York, who's one of the producers at the Royal Shakespeare Company, Claire Birch, who's another producer there, and my team. There's a team of 4 in the department. And we meet every 6 weeks, have a look at all of the projects and proposals that have come in. It's quite a long meeting, but it's quite a good meeting. It's kind of 2 hours straight through. And we've got usually 1 or 2 projects happening every week, so we're kind of keeping tabs on everything all the time. But yeah, I mean, that's the job.
Fantastic. Would you like to speak a little bit about your work, and then maybe just have a sort of brief introduction? And then
Yeah. So I graduated last year from Buxton University, and what you were saying was quite interesting to me, because how I created my show, I Can't Breathe, it was my dissertation, and so the brief was to either write a 10,000 word piece or write 5,000 in a 20-minute show, and I chose to do the 5,000 in a 20-minute show. And so while I was thinking about like what can I create, what was going on around me at the time was the police brutality, And I really wanted to create something that meant something to me, because I just didn't want to, just because it was my dissertation, it was a project, just create something that was going to get me all the marks. Like, for me, I need to be interested in what I'm creating, and so I decided to just explore what was going on in America, the police brutality, but also explore the history in Britain as well, when it was looking at just the black history, basically, because for me, I'm a black woman and I'm in the creative industry. So I just, first of all, just wanted to go back to see, okay, where has my history come from? What was happening in the past, what's happening now, and what can happen in the future. And so for me, that's how I created the story of I Can't Breathe. And I decided to just look at like past artists, so past artists like, not past artists, but just artists that began from the past, like Maya Angelou and Billie Holiday and James Baldwin. So just writers and creators from back then, but also looking at writers and creators and singers from now. So I was looking at artists like Kendrick Lamar, just people that were speaking about their experience through their art. And also, at the same time, I also wanted to put my own voice in that. So that's kind of how the piece came to life, because before this, I really didn't see myself as a writer at all. I really just saw myself as, okay, I'm a performer. But doing this, kind of, I got to explore, like, I kind of describe myself as like a peacemaker. So instead of writing it from scratch, I took like some of the writings from Maya Angelou and some of the lyrics from Kendrick Lamar, and then using some of my own writing or describing what I was seeing and what I was experiencing. So when you were talking about how the pieces that you show at you get it from different, like it can be from new artists, it can be from people that don't have loads of works in their catalogue. That resonated with me because this was it was such a brand new thing I was going into. It was just very brand new for me. And so I feel like, I just feel like you don't have to put yourself in a box, like I'm a performer, like I just act or I just write. I feel like we're in this industry for a reason, and so we can not dabble, but we can write and also create and also act. We can do all of it, and I hope I'm not rambling.
No,
Is
it's
it making
okay.
sense?
It's making complete sense, and I'm going to come back to this kind of multitasking, but I think this is in a second. But I think it's a great segue to kind of pass on to Roberto, who said, you're going to introduce me one way, but then I'm probably going to kind of challenge the way you introduce me anyway. So what are you? What do you do? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I come from a visual arts background. I was originally born in New York City. My parents are from South America. I grew up there as well. I've been based in Britain a while, so now I'm a London artist, is what I consider myself. And I ended up working in performance practice through kind of engaging in site-specific work and putting just in how I situated audiences and how I situated people in installation, and that became performance. So I sort of came from it from a slightly different angle. I never studied theatre, and although I work in performance practice, I don't consider myself coming from a theatre background. In the last couple of years, my practice has really shifted in terms of how I was thinking about social engagement. So I became really dedicated to creating work that was both site-specific and socially engaged, and what that means, and then who are you engaging and how, and then who am I to engage, and where do I sit? Especially somebody who's got quite a lot of cultural identities, have quite a lot of names.
Yeah, it's called Roberto, didn't it?
Yeah. My name is Roberto Marcelo, so I have a really long name. I go by my middle name or my first name, depending when you know me. And that's been really interesting the last couple of years because of public funding. I work on commission, so I work project to project, and then there's a real there is this kind of upswing in terms of funding for diversity, but then there can be a big challenge around what that means. about what they want out of it, what you really want to produce, and when you're working with people, you know, what they really think that they want or what they're going to get out of it. And it's a kind of strong political place to be in, especially when talking about diversity. And I'll have more to say in terms of funding and diversity and projects that I've worked on, but that's an overview of my practice and why.
Okay, thank you. And Ben?
So I am a playwright by profession and now artistic director of a national touring company, Tamasha. I write plays to commission for main stages and also for radio. I do less of that now because I'm full-time artistic director and more of a producer and dramaturg of other writers' work. Alongside professional commissions, I've developed a long and very kind of evolved strand of writing for teenagers, but in particular working in quite an embedded way, predominantly in inner city schools in East London. So I've got a relationship stretching back 12 years or so now with a school, Modupe School for Girls in Tower Hamlets, which is 96% Bangladeshi Muslim student population. People know it because Michelle Obama went there last year to launch her girls' education charity, but it's been sort of reaching out to the theatre industry and doing lots of creative arts projects for a very long time. So I've been actually a part-time salaried playwright in residence in that school over the years, which is quite a pioneering thing for a state school to do, and we've taken shows to the Edinburgh Fringe, got a Scotsman Fringe first in 2009, which is the first time a school ever got one, and all my plays from that period of my career are published, and there's 2 volumes of plays in the shops now with these sort of large cast, diverse parts, predominantly but not exclusively for young women of South Asian descent. So all of that sort of led me to Tamasha. Tamasha is a 26-year-old national touring company. Tamasha is a word in Hindi and Urdu which means causing a commotion, causing a scene. And the company was founded as the British Asian National Touring Company in 1890, and by 2 women who just weren't seeing themselves on stage at that time, Sudha Butcher and Christine Landon Smith. And the company was responsible in the 90s for a lot of the crossover of British Asian culture into the mainstream. They commissioned and produced the original stage production of East is East by I've Come In, which of course went on to become a film and West End and Broadway. And that's traditionally always been the function that the company's played. It's as a stepping stone into the mainstream for diverse new talent. The British Asian focus has broadened over the years. In 2011, prior to my arrival, the company changed its mission statement away from solely championing British Asian artists and stories towards cross-cultural theatre making in all its forms, with a kind of 21st century openness on what that means and looks like, and that's an ongoing dialogue with our artists and audiences. The company's small. We produce 1 national tour a year, but we do tour far and wide. We do 3 weeks in London and 6 to 8 weeks on the road. And alongside that, uniquely in fact, we have a very large artist training program called Tamasha Developing Artists, which is a network of 2,000 emerging theatre makers. In its simplest form, it's a free mailing list, but when we have funding to do so, we offer various opportunities through that list, such as bursaries for assistant directors on the main house shows, workshops in different aspects of theatre making, response commissions to the national tours, and all kinds of other opportunities as and when we can offer them. And that's really a talent pool through which we R&D new ideas, engage with new talent. We regularly produce scratch nights of new short plays by new writers and try out new actors through that network. And a lot of the national tours do sort of pass through Tamasha Developing Artists and go through a sort of scratch night iteration on the way to ending up on our main stages. So that's us sort of in summary. I originally started at Tamasha as an associate artist in 2010 through Tamasha Developing Artists. In fact, the company was advertising for some artists, associate artists, and when I rang up the office and said, what do you want these associate artists to do, they rather brilliantly said, suggest something. So I'd done 5 years at Modupe School at that time, and I was looking for a way to evolve the work, and I suggested founding and using the Tamasha Developing Artists Network to advertise for a pilot playwrights in schools training programme, opening Modupe up as a training base for a new generation of writers, which we did, and we've done it in a couple of pilot iterations, and there's now quite a successful scheme called School Rights. So yeah, I'll stop there. I'm happy to talk about any more aspects of that.
Again, a number of points to be picked up later, but maybe if I could kind of bring the conversation back to this side of me, to my right. You said that the founders of Tamasha were interested in seeing, that they couldn't see themselves on stage. So I wanted to bring this question specifically to you as a young black performer. Is that something that, did you feel like you had to write the play with that sort of magpie approach because there wasn't a play for you to perform? Did you feel like you needed to create your own show, to become a theatre maker in order to make the theatre that you wanted to do?
Yes, but I also felt, I think what really pushed me to write the play was that I felt like it was my story to be told. Like I felt like if no one else is telling the story, and maybe it's not someone else's story to be told, and I felt like I had the responsibility to tell that story. And so at the same time, yeah, it does relate to not seeing myself, see people like me on stage, but I generally just thought this was my story to tell in the first place.
And yet you have this sort of international kind of link with Black Lives Matter and so is there is this conversation perhaps more broad than, and you having been born in the United States and today being a very special day in the United States history, for better or worse, is that, do you think this is a conversation that is more broad, that goes beyond UK shores?
What do you mean about having roles on stage? This is something that, we just saw the big protest that happened in Hollywood for the, for the Oscars. It's happening at an institutional level, absolutely. And I think that's also chalked up to how money is spent. I was thinking about this because I was thinking about diversity, like what does it mean to have this push for diversity? Who's pushing it? And ultimately, if you look at, how do I say this politely? If you look at the power structures behind funding, it sort of reflects class and culture and race, especially in the arts. And I've seen it. I was at a celebration dinner for a very big event. Very small group of people, and we were sat in order of importance at this table, from the very important in the middle to the not so important at the edges. And I remember looking down the table thinking, oh my God, look at that. I can read the class system in the country. I can read the money. I can read the power dynamics just at this table. And I was told where to sit anyway, so I was a little bit more towards the end, obviously. So anyway, to respond to your question, is I think it's not just at our level as like the makers. It's how it's sort of trickling down with the money.
Which brings me perhaps quite appropriately to you, Pippa, as one of the. Dare I call you a gatekeeper in a large national institution? You do have some say to what gets commissioned and what gets done and so on. So the role of institutions, particularly large institutions like the RSC, is really important in this conversation.
Yeah, and you've got to put your money where your mouth is.
And where's your money?
Yeah, it's right in the middle of this conversation, and this conversation is an incredibly live conversation. And you look at the stats of who's been performing and directing and writing historically the Royal Shakespeare Company. It's not very diverse. But you look at the stats over the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years, then suddenly things are unlocking, things are changing. It is about gatekeepers, and it is about the conversations at the top, as well as the conversations with the artists who are emerging and all the way through. It's really interesting, your question about where the impetus for diversity comes from. Because it's just as much from the artists as it is. It's about asking the question, who don't you know? When I'm the head of commissioning at the Royal Shakespeare Company. It's my responsibility to think when a project comes up, okay, so these are the people that naturally I would go to for this commission. Okay, who's not on this? Who haven't I thought? Who haven't I met? Who don't I know? And that's what the company has to keep doing. So yeah, slightly uncomfortably for me being the voice of the establishment.
I didn't mean to cast you as such.
But it is our responsibility to ask those
And then there's sort of, you said there's a sort of a chain of things happening at the top, and this sort of top level conversations, but also at grassroots, and maybe a good opportunity to bring Finn in again with this idea of the work that you do in fostering young talent and through education. How does that sort of feed into this ecosystem, if you like, of diversity in our industry?
Well, it takes a number of forms at Tamasha. A recent example, which is an initiative that I started 3 years ago when I was first in post, was a new in-house playwrights group, which we use the Tamasha Developing Artists list to advertise for applications for. I've always swamped to get 70 or 80 plays to read. And we take on 8 writers on attachment for the year. This is a completely unfunded pilot. It just uses our office after work and the skills I've got on salary to teach playwriting. But the model is trying to try out a new model of playwright training. So it's not a sort of top-down, here's how you write a Royal Court play model, as important as those courses are. It's a writer-led collective. So there's sessions by demand on whatever aspects of the craft they want to look at. And we work that out in the first couple of sessions for what their year with us is going to look like. There's the freedom to suggest projects and to lead on them as an individual writer in the group. I offer producer training, so how do you apply to grants for the arts and fill in that Arts Council form? How do you structure a budget in Excel for a fringe show? How do you project manage? How do you work with schools? We train them all as workshop leaders for teaching playwriting to schools and youth theatres so that they can make a living freelance between play commissions, because God knows they're few and far between, they don't pay much when they come along anyway. So it's really about what do you guys need and want to have a career. And we're honest with them that we're small, we produce 1 show a year, there's 8 of you, and every year we take on another 8, do the maths, it's very unlikely we're going to produce your play. It's not impossible, but that's not the point of the exercise in the first instance. It's about investing in a pool of freelancers who we can call on as and when for other different projects such as workshops in schools, perhaps around the main show, but also to really nurture and develop long-term relationships with as artists who need our support beyond, more so than just this commission or that project, because I think actually investing in the artist rather than the play is really the key to being able to launch stable careers.
It's about brokering relationships as well.
It is, and being a champion of that group to other in theatre companies. Because we don't have a building. We have an office in Richmond, in Shoreditch, but we tour all over the country, so we know all the theatres, and we take our work to many of them and have those warm relationships. So we're in a good, flexible position to be quite light on our feet. We don't have a bricks and mortar building to worry about and seasons to programme all year round. We can focus some more, perhaps proportionately, of our resources on artist development and championing those diverse artists in the sector. And we're becoming increasingly known for that, and that's, really proud of that.
And what's interesting is that you talk about also giving them skills that are not necessarily directly related to the craft of the art itself, but actually the kind of funding and so on. Mm-hmm. So this kind of leads me to think a little bit about the precarity of artist situations, and perhaps back to the point that Marcella was talking about, that money is so scarce anyway, and that you need to have these various other roles. So you do a lot of engagement with community as well. Is that just a survival strategy? It's a bit provocative perhaps to ask, but
there's probably better things I could do for money.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's really important to consider, especially if you're young and studying and want to stay in the creative field, that actually there's not enough to absorb everyone that's graduating in all of the creative disciplines. There's not enough economy to absorb everybody. And what happens is sometimes the people who have enough family financial backing to continue their practice can surge. And then that creates a disparity, especially when you're trying to look at diversity among artists. Right now we're just talking around diversity of practitioners, because I think there's a whole topic around diversity of audiences, which is really important.
We'll get to that.
But we'll get to it, yeah. And so one of the things to think about is how, as an artist, you yourself represent diversity, and how by representing that, you sort of, I guess, continue your practice outside of what you may do to pay your rent and the reality of just having to live. I think I'm quite lucky in that I've found a way that I managed to do a variety of things, and all around ideas of social engagement and practice. But I think to get to where I am now took ages. It took to even figure it out. I work as an arts facilitator at a hospice in South London a couple of days a week. Really interesting work. I have free reign. It's like my practice embedded in this institution, very big institution. So I do a lot of work across South London with them. So in a way, it's also how you might define your practice given the circumstance that builds around you, which is really important to think about as well.
And do you think you need to be overtly talking about these things, or is it enough to just embody these things in your practice and what you do? In other words, do your pieces need to be about, maybe this is a question for you as well, do they need to be ostensibly about, you know, Black lives, or about your experience as an immigrant in this country and so on, or is it just by virtue of just doing stuff you're already kind of contributing to the conversation? I don't know.
Well,
I should have directed the question to somebody, shouldn't I? Just leaving it out.
Yeah, no, I feel like I like to be a part of something that, I feel like I like to be a part of something that's reflecting what I'm in. So that's reflecting society. That's why right now I made I Can't Breathe, because that's what I was seeing. So I don't know if it's I'm doing it on purpose, that I'm purposely writing for Black people, like, about Black lives, or it's just my experience. And I think that's the only way I can be honest. And I like to create honest work. So I just feel like it's just what I experience, and I just like to reflect what is in front of me. So I don't think it's a conscious decision. I just think it's
through
just
something that happens actually here. What do you want to say something?
I think that the work that I create, I consider it really overtly political, but I don't ever really talk about politics in the practice. The fact that I work with diverse communities, the fact that I work site-specifically, I did a big project last year on an estate in Dagenham, which I felt was really political, really social. The piece itself was about parkour, it had fire in it, had all this stuff in it because of the energy that I found there. I thought it said loads about diversity, but I didn't go and make a piece that was like, I'm going to make a diversity piece.
Yeah.
I didn't really have to, because I was embedded in a context that I felt was going to allow it to come out no matter what I say. So for me, I feel like the work, because of the way I position myself, is really embedded with kind of politics, but I don't speak about it directly.
This sort of kind of, again, leads us to think maybe about this idea that the type of work that you do, you go out into a community and you spend time with them, and so there's something about that, whereas it's a different model from what you're proposing, for instance, in Tamasha, where you create a show and then you tour it and you just go, so maybe we're making that transition, starting to talk about audiences here, the people with whom you work, spending time, versus perhaps the people that come to you, although I know the RSC also tour a lot, and the type of work that Tamasha do also in going around the country to try and reach out to audiences. Is that part of your brief?
Yes, yeah, absolutely is, yeah. The audiences are diverse, funnily enough. I mean, historically, of course, we've been associated with cultivating South Asian audiences in British cities and elsewhere, and that's, I think, still predominantly what people think of us as, and I'm sure that those do, play a big part in our audience analysis. But we try and program work which really speaks to, as you said in your introduction, is inspired by the diversity of a globalised world. And we have a lot of conversations behind the scenes with what our venues are looking for. Each city is different. There might be different priorities that each venue wants to cultivate this community or that community who they don't think is coming through the doors so much. It's quite hard when you've got to do one show a year that's kind of got to hit all those different priorities, I mean, the other thing is we always do 3 weeks in London, and there's a particular kind of audience in London as well that comes from new writing that are up for a bit of formal experimentation, or politics in the kind of big ideas sense, or even sort of slightly abstract sense. But you've also got to take that show on tour, and it's got to draw in an audience on a rainy Wednesday night in Hull. And those audiences don't want that at all. They want a good night out and a ripping good yarn and a story with a beginning, middle, and end. And Hull Truck, when we go to Hull, we play there, say their top ticket price is £12. And the reason is because that's the price of a fish supper in Hull. And that's their main competition, is the chipping. And if they don't want people coming out of their show going, I'd rather have gone to the chippy, because then they failed. So, you know, and you've got one show that's got to sort of do all this. So it's a really interesting and complicated brief, and that's why we cultivate so many artists and so many writers and play ideas at any one moment. It's partly about developing that long-term relationship, helping them understand what we're looking for, but it's also about looking for that very unique kind of creature, which is the touring show that can speak to all those different demographics. A great example in our more recent output is the plays of Ishi Din. Ishi is a former minicab driver from Middlesbrough, now in his 40s, who became a playwright after coming to a Tamasha open access playwright workshop at Oldham Coliseum in 2008. Turned out to be a natural. We kind of invested in his training until he had a play which we were ready to produce, which we did in 2012, his first play called Snookered, which was about 4 Muslim lads in their 20s getting drunk in a snooker hall on the anniversary of a friend's death. Let's face it, it's not a representation of young British Muslim men you normally see. That launched Ishi's career. He's now being commissioned all over the place, TV, film and theatre, including a new film with Govinda Chadha, who did Bend It Like Beckham, and he's very in demand. His plays are great because they're sweary and subversive and hilarious, but they're very political. They're motivated by a real subtle anger at the state of the world, and in particular the state of working class north and mostly British Muslim communities, but not exclusively. So that's the sort of show which will play well in those different areas. It's about looking at what is the access point in the show for different audiences. So our next show in 2017, we're opening in Belgrade, Coventry, who we're co-producing with in January, a new show called Made in India by Satinder Chauhan. And then we're touring it through to April, including 3 weeks at Soho Theatre in March. That's an all-female three-hander set in a surrogacy clinic in Gujarat. These are places where Western women go to have their eggs extracted and implanted into the womb of a village girl who gets paid a lot of money to carry the baby, which is illegal in the UK and Europe, but booming business in the developing world. In fact, it's just been outlawed in India, and that kind of features in the play. It's a brilliant studio scale, big ideas in a small package play. So it's kind of about globalisation and the free market, where that rubs up against human reproductive science, and all in this post-colonial setting. Yet it's 3 women in a room. It's a very clever piece, and so the main one of the character who sort of drives the plot forward, at least in the first instance, is the white Western Londoner who goes to the clinic for treatment. But then, of course, meets the clinic owner, who's the main doctor in the piece, Dr. Gupta, and then the surrogate Arditi. So there's kind of different entry points for different audiences there, and different political perspectives and emotional landscapes within that.
So this idea of finding the sweet spot that might hit a variety of audiences, I guess is something that's very much part of your work in terms of the kind of, you know, given the breadth of appeal of that work that comes from the artist needs to have. And maybe is that part of your editing work and when you kind of work with directors as a dramaturg?
Yeah, I mean that's partly about it's partly about what practitioners we put on which shows.
Mm-hmm.
So how we develop our audiences is it's quite sort of multi-layered. I would say at the on the face value, it's really important that we have directors from diverse backgrounds who are directing classical. So we're having large-scale performances of Shakespeare plays, but interpreted and directed by companies who have diverse backgrounds, including the acting company. From my perspective, working on the early modern work, so the Jacobean and Elizabethan plays, it's about putting artists on those plays, because they're often not very well known at all, and looking at them through a contemporary lens. And by contemporary lens, I mean very much a diverse contemporary lens. So we're not just aiming those early modern plays at one particular audience who might be really into traditional productions of Jacobean work. So when you start looking at a more diverse base of production teams and editing process, the writers that start working on those kind of plays, then you can crack it open and you can start presenting a season of those plays that have meet different audiences in different places, essentially. There's one way. And the other place, it's open season. That's, you know, you can all manner of mischief it is about who you commission, in my view. It's about the start of the process as well as the final. You know, it's about who's there right at the beginning, who you're putting on the product.
That's an interesting point as well, because I think we talk a lot about the faces that we might see on stage, the faces that we might see on screen, but there's, I know Act for Change, for example, have been doing a lot of monitoring of not only the cast, but actually the creatives behind the show. So it's directors, it's writers, and so on. So that sort of commissioning, the people who are working behind the scenes, if you like, on stage, and maybe as a scenographer, you can talk a little bit about that. I hesitate to call you a scenographer now, but a maker. You make shows from scratch, from rubbish sometimes. I've been in one of your shows, which was literally made from rubbish.
That was about recycling.
It was,
It's interesting. I think that probably what I can say more in terms of, I could probably say less in terms of looking at diversity of designers and makers, and more than I can say about the kinds of work I've been doing over the last couple of years, which is working with people to make the show happen. And why that's felt really important. Particularly because it's much harder to control the aesthetic, and so you slightly have to let go, which can be really difficult from a kind of directorial point of view. Also, because of some of the communities I've gone out to work in, and approaching people to say, okay, we're going to create like a live performance together. Have you seen live performance? No. It's like, okay, you know, and so when you don't have a cultural reference to share, that's really quite tricky, and that's happened to me. And that is also, I think, brings in this question about diversity. It's actually people's cultural knowledge can be really different. I worked with a group of women from Romani who their kind of cultural knowledge of performance was music and their dance to their music. I was like, great, let's bring that in. So it's sort of being able to understand, and this is maybe coming at it from a really different angle than just how it might fit into an existing format of performance, but saying, what are the tools that are already out there that people have, and that they know? What are the kind of cultural tools that they already have, and how can we reinterpret them to say, well, let's put them together with, you know, this hip-hop street dancer, you know, how can we put you together? And which I did. And, you know, what comes out of it. So it sometimes can be about juxtaposing things together, or juxtaposing knowledge together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, because I feel like that's what I was doing, and I just kind of was going along with what I knew, and so I was partnering up my love for music, for my love for poetry, for my love for physical theatre, and just mashing up something together.
It's like a mashup.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to the heart of maybe what dramaturgy is, isn't it? It's, as I said, this process of trying to organize a bunch of stuff to establish or to somehow mediate a relationship between what you want to say, between these various things, and an audience that you might be trying to reach, perhaps. I don't know if that has something. If when you deal with plays that are actually written, whether that's also part of what comes to your mind.
Yeah, I mean, we're from a sort of text-based new writing tradition. I mean, not exclusively, actually. Prior to me, there were kind of large-scale devised shows and musicals and adaptations and work that was more from that tradition. That's not the tradition I'm from, so obviously I'm, you know, creating work in the way that I know. One of the things I do encourage our writers to do is to engage with other dramaturgies and other senses of how they conceive of and articulate their ideas. And that doesn't always end up in a formally experimental show on stage, but it's really about helping them to sort of zoom out of the surface detail of whatever world they're absorbed in. and to sort of develop a kind of X-ray vision to look below that surface. So one of the things we talk about in the company are cultural fault lines, and that's as much about locating our work in a social and cultural context of contemporary Britain as it is a dramaturgical tool to help writers understand what are the big sort of tectonic forces at work in their play idea. So what's this show about? Oh, well, it's about this guy whose marriage breaks down. Yeah, but what's it really about? You know, under the surface, the big themes that manipulate us all: love, glory, power, revenge, coming of age. And where do they rub up against one another, particularly in real society? Faith and secularism, for example. And just starting to be able to locate dramatic conflict on real fault lines in society, because that's where I think work has genuine political relevance. And actually a foot in the door to in a modest kind of way, have some sort of, take part in some kind of, if not social change exactly, then cultural or perception shifts around certain issues.
I think it's really important that we're talking about being part of a national dialogue, perhaps, and thinking about theatre as something that, if not necessarily brings about change, at least becomes part of a conversation about change. And in that respect, given the context that we're living in currently, part of your work, as far as I understand, has to do also with commissioning translations. So bringing plays from other parts of the world into a British context. What other fault lines, to use Finn's expression, that need to be crossed in this process? Is it a complex thing? How does that sit with the other work that you guys do?
I'm working on a big project at the moment, which is a translation project with China, a cultural exchange with China. That's probably the biggest translation focus we've got at the moment. What's really interesting about that, for me, is looking at how practice of translation operates in this country and comparing it to how it operates elsewhere. So it's exchanging best practice, it's exploring all of that. It's also bringing classical Chinese stories to an audience that may or may not know them. One of the things I found really interesting when I was doing some research in Shanghai was that there's not a great interest in China for those stories. And I was really surprised by that. It's quite different coming from Stratford upon Avon, where there is a great interest in writers of 400 years old. Very, very different. So that's been really interesting. But I'm really interested in the practice, and I'm really interested in how we behave in terms of using literal translations in this country, and different practices around that. So part of that project, for me, is to find a way of giving the translator of the base text more collaborative clout in a relationship with a British-based playwright. So that's very, very interesting. So what we've done is we've teamed up Western writers with translators based in China. So the translators in China are really working very much on creating incredibly close translations of ancient texts from around the sort of 12th to 17th century. And they're in very close dialogue with Western based either here or in the States. And I'm really interested in that conversation. Because there's something really different about a theatre company just buying a literal translation and handing it over to a British playwright and saying, go on, polish it and make it palatable. And we'll put your name on it that everybody recognises and everyone will come. There's a really big difference between that practice and actually a really close collaboration between the two, because it brings a really different quality to the work. And the show we're working on at the moment, Snow in Midsummer, it's just fascinating. It's fascinating how the closer we brought the translator in, how the translation has shifted. So that's very interesting. It's also very interesting to me and to the Royal Shakespeare Company, getting to know the East Asian theatre community a bit better.
There's a big debate around that as well recently.
Yeah, of course.
And I think it all boils down to, and perhaps in all the things that have been said here from your show, Modupe, to Roberta Marcella's work in communities, to finish this idea of whose stories are we telling and who's entitled to tell them to a certain extent, right? So you go with the community and say, that I'm going to work with you to help you tell your story, or maybe you could speak a little bit about that. You said, I want to tell something that speaks to me, even if it's in America, but it's also my story, and so.
I was going to respond, which I think also responds to what you were saying, but also with translation, because I think translation is really political.
Yeah.
I don't mean to get caught up in these political things. I keep saying things are really
No,
political, but
it's
it's
right.
true.
It is.
It's very political. Translation is very political. So, and I think you know that if you speak more than one language, actually you almost adopt different personalities in different languages. But you don't almost, you definitely do.
Yeah.
You are different people in a different language, right?
Yeah.
And I was going to give 2 examples that came to mind when you were talking about that. One is a project that I just am getting into now. I don't really know what my role will be in it, but it's this theater for everyone, which is based in Gaza. I've been working on a 10-year project, which is a Russian translation of War and Peace. That's being put on by A to Z Theatre Company in Gaza next August. And I'm sort of helping them think about how we would represent that process in the UK. There's so many series of translations in that, because it's not just the translation of the text, but also how you're kind of translating a process, and how you're representing it, and how you talk about,
You're dramatising it as well. So
Absolutely.
You've got another layer on top of it.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. And the lens that you're going to take, and do we focus on the actor training, and this, I think it's all very interesting. So there's a kind of level there of, I think, a translation which isn't just about language, but it's about how we represent practice. And then I was thinking about this piece that I can't remember exactly the name of, but you can Google it later. But it was phenomenal, and I saw it at the Venice Biennale in the Polish pavilion, and I believe this was last year, I think. It was a Polish opera company that went to, I think it was Haiti, and went to this village where apparently there's lots of people with Polish surnames because a Polish infantry had fought in the revolution, the Asian Revolution, I think it's late 1700s, 1789 or something. And they had stayed on, and they were welcome, even though they were white, because they had helped them fight the revolution. And as a result, there's lots of people with Polish surnames. So this Polish company went and they put on this opera that was written around that time that is based there, but is this European opera of the late 18th century. And there's these people, and it's a video, and it's absolutely phenomenal, because there's these people in like European costume doing opera on a dirt road in this village, and loads of villagers just watching them. And I was really thinking about translation, because it wasn't just translation of language, it was cultural translation, costume, movement, just everything. But it was a love story. You kind of get a love story. You can get that. So there's a lot of kind of politics around what was being translated and how.
And I guess that again brings us back to the idea of audiences, doesn't it? Who's watching these things? Who's engaging with this work that we're trying to put out? I know you're putting on your show, a plug here for this Friday and Saturday at the Camden People's Theatre.
Yeah.
So what sort of audiences are coming to see you?
It's interesting because since I've been performing it, so I performed it first at uni, which is in Highbury. So that was a mixed audience, so just outside London. And then I performed it, I've been trying to rack my brain where it was, at the National Student Drama Festival. Scarborough, thank you. It was in Scarborough. That was a completely different audience for me. That one was more middle class, white, musical, theatre trained people that are completely different.
Okay.
And then I've performed it back in London, in, where is it? Performed it back in London, and now I'm performing it in Camden as well. So they've been completely different audiences, and the responses have been different. Because like in Scarborough, the response was just complete shock. like they kind of just didn't know, not like they didn't know this was going on, but just to see, because the performance is it's just 15 minutes, but it's very quite sharp and kind of, yeah, in your face in a way. And so it was kind of like not a slap in the face, but like bang, like this is what I'm talking about. This is what's been going on here. What do you think? What's your opinion? And it was just shock, like, oh my God, it was just shock, and just they were quite empathetic with it, and they sympathised with it, and they felt maybe guilty a bit, just different, kind of different reactions. And then back in London, it was more, I get what you're talking about, and I can see me on stage right now, and I can see my experience, so maybe it was more personal, so it was just completely different reactions. So I don't know, I think it's as long as what you're showing is honest, because I feel like everyone kind of experiences, you all go through your own experiences, and so in plays you have the tragedies, you have the love stories, we can all relate to that. So as long as it's honest, I think anyone can relate to it. That's why when I was creating this show, I really wasn't thinking about the audience. I don't know, I didn't think about it, because I was just thinking people need to know. People, even if you don't want to, at least watch, at least there's no excuse that you haven't been told about it. I think sometimes, even though it's important to think about who your audience, like what you were talking about, who you're showing this to, but at the same time, I feel like we all need to know anyway. I feel like there's stuff that everyone needs to know about. But that's just, I don't know if that's just me being naive, and me just like...
It's true. I mean, I think you're right. You're in a way, it sometimes gets asked about artists, who is this for, who is your audience? And actually, I think don't bother the artist with that. Let them create the brilliant art. Actually, it's the producing company that is commissioning and presenting that art. So that's to worry about audiences. Don't worry about audiences. It's complicated and not hugely interesting all the time. But it's important to the producing companies.
Right.
And I mean, there will probably be a loose conversation about audiences at some point once you get into a relationship with a company who wants to produce your work. But actually, that's not your responsibility really. So don't worry about it too much. I mean, one of the things that we come up against with touring is, there isn't an audience for this in our area. And we hear that quite a lot. And actually, we always sort of go, well, actually there is. If you look at the demographics of your city, it's just that they're not coming to see the work you're currently putting on because it doesn't speak to them. And so they go, okay, well, we'll book it for 1 or 2 nighs and sort of try it out. Now, that's a surefire way to go around the country hemorrhaging cash. We really push for sort of 5 nights or more in bookings, just because it's a way to build word of mouth about a show, and actually, in order to make venues feel safe about taking a risk on our work for that length of time, we have to, and this is where Tamasha Developing Artists comes into its own, we have a long tradition of the company of using the national tour as a platform for quite substantial creative outreach projects, often participatory, and often quite innovative in form. And they often become their own creative product. So I'll give you 2 examples coming up. The Made in India tour, which we're doing in the new year, given the biomedical subject matter, we applied to the Wellcome Trust to commission Satinder, the writer of the show, to do a residency in a research institute at Cambridge University who study the effects on young people of being born by assisted reproductive technologies, so IVF, surrogacy, egg and sperm donation. And then for Satinder to spend time with Generation Arts, who are a youth theatre in London who work with kids leaving care, to craft a new 45-minute play for youth theatres that's inspired by the same source material as her main house show, Made in India. That's been presented this summer at Lyric Hammersmith, and now the script exists, and we're offering that out to youth theatres on the Made in India tour circuit for 4 further productions to land in the same week that Made in India is in the main house, usually playing on top of the set. So now what that does is it has a sort of double bill effect. You kind of multiply it by having 2 shows. The The youth theatres will bring a whole ton of new audiences through, friends, family, teachers, and the venue can do marketing and ticket offers to buy tickets to both, and that kind of thing. Another one is a new-ish Din play, who I mentioned, the taxi driver turned playwright, who we produced in 2012. We've got a new play by him in development for 2018 called Approaching Empty, which is all set in a minicab office up north, which is something of a homecoming for him. And we've already started R&Ding the outreach project for that because it's quite ambitious. It's a project called Taxi Tales, which involves bringing playwrights together with real minicab drivers to develop monologues for the drivers to perform to customers in their cabs. And we've already done that last year for the first time in an R&D phase in Stockton, where she's from, and in a smaller kind of scratch-like iteration with Freedom Studios in Bradford. And we're building it up for a big fundraising. We need to fundraise for it, but we want it to be the main outreach project on the national tour. So we'll have a Taxi Tales team who can go in to spend time with minicab firms in the towns and cities on the tour circuit 3 or 4 months in advance to generate local stories, which will open in the same week that the show's in the main house. Initially had the rather lovely idea that you might pay a bit more for your ticket to Approaching Empty, and the taxi collects you from your house and takes you to the venue and you go on the way. So all of that, well, we'll see, it's quite, logistics are quite complicated, but so that is sort of about audiences as well. It's actually about, you can't rely on them to come to you, you actually have to go and creatively involve them in what might at first be a wholly separate product, but sort of eventually brings them through the doors, and that's quite a long-term strategy.
Which perhaps brings me to Midsummer Night's Dream. And the work that's been happening all around the country with refugee camp audiences.
I'm amazed Eric is still standing after that. They started in January, and they did open auditions in various cities all around the country, looking for amateur theatre groups to play the mechanicals in a national tour of Midsummer Night's Dream. It's just a huge, huge, huge project. And every single production, so we then took the show to each place where each amateur company was based, and we found, through visiting various schools in that area, found a very trained primary school children to also perform in every show. So I haven't got the stats, but thousands of children across the country took part, and it was really a year-long project with a big final production came back in Stratford in the summer, the end of it. But in terms of engaging with both amateur groups and with schools from areas where we feel we should be going to, it's really interesting what you were saying about coming across groups that you're working with who don't have a meeting point with you. Like certainly they came across school groups who primary school children who'd never sung, so we had to teach them to sing because that's what the fairy train essentially were doing. That is astonishing. But yeah, it was an amazing one.
So also engaging with the communities that you're going to be performing to as part of the performance also, and that sort of audience development as much as anything else.
Well, it's part of the Learning Performance Network, which is a 10-year project which our education department has been running, which is engaging with, I think it's 430 schools around the country, all in places like Hull, the West Midlands, or Cornwall, and that was where we toured to. So we already had engagement with those school groups, and we'd already been working with them. So it is about taking the work out, but also it's about developing an audience who are going to be interested in both Shakespeare and new work, later on in life, and they're much more likely to if they've had a series of engagements with the company early on.
Which is a question that I had for you, Marcelo. Given, you spent some time in Dagenham, 6 months or so, how do you make sure that the work stays, that the stuff that happened there, that the people who engage with that project, then after you leave, carry on wanting to engage with the arts, is that important for you, this legacy, for want of a better word?
It's not just important for me, it's kind of, it's sort of part of the funding. So sustainability is always like a key thing, and there's various ways that that's approached. In that particular case, it was interesting because what sort of happens is when you build new audiences, through like outreach components. So you have this idea of what you want to do. Then we did a variety of different workshops. We got an empty shop from the council. We started running workshops through that shop. You start building new audiences because they haven't really engaged. They're actually termed by the Arts Council low cultural engagers. It's true. And you have to collect their postcodes because the Arts Council is really into postcodes. And once you build a sort of network of people, which is an audience, and you produce something, which is what we did, we produced something. Then there was another project, which was Geraldine Pilgrim did a fantastic project called Well in an abandoned factory. And a lot of people that were working on this project went and then actually performed in her project, which was much more of a structured kind of theatrical experience. And then a year later, the shop actually kept running as a gallery by residents. Really cool photography project came out of it, where a local resident photographed people. It was called Boats, Planes and Trains. And it photographed people with a drawing of a boat, a plane, or a train, or how they arrived in London. And then a story of their immigration. Beautiful project, beautiful. And he was a young guy from the estate. I mean, you know, he was not an artist, he was becoming an artist. That piece, phenomenal. I mean, you know, really poetic. And then a year later, I was working through Communities Can grant via the Young Foundation, doing a project at Barking Library, which is kind of right next to them. And so many people kind of resurfaced who had then, there had been a big community outreach project by Punch Drunk there as well. And they came as audience members to this walkthrough kind of spoken word piece I was doing at the library. And I remember two of them, and they said, oh yeah, we come to these things now because, you know, we know about it. We would have never come had we not gotten engaged in the first place. I thought, oh wow, success story. You know, but actually there's no way I can measure that. But it's done. Unfortunately, there's a lack in communication on how that's measured through a lot of funding streams. That's a whole other thing. I'm not getting into that now.
I wanted to maybe shift the conversation a little bit. We talked a lot about culture, about ethnicity, about class, the conversations, but both of you know me from previous lives, and you know I also have a particular interest in disability and representation of disability. So is any of the work that you guys do associated also with increasing diversity in terms of disabled practitioners working with you guys in one way or another?
Yeah, and we've got various projects on the go at any one time. That they are artist development and finding a journey through onto the main stages, basically, both behind the scenes and on stage. The casting department also have an awful lot to say about that, about how you. I mean, the casting department do a lot of travelling around and opening auditions and meeting people and seeking out the people that they know are missing from the mainstream on our stages. And it's just really fundamental. It is something that we need to get better at.
It goes back to that question: who do I not know? And so seeking out.
Yeah.
Is it something that's a total part of the work that you guys do, maybe in the community that you've engaged with, or in the audiences that you've reached out to?
Yeah, well, certainly part of the point of doing outreach projects is to meet potential new talent as well. I mean, the Tamasha Development Artists Network that I've mentioned tends to be people based in London, just because physically that's where most of our, you know, it's where a lot of our offices is, or where we do a 3-week run in London is physically where the kind of wraparound work takes place. But we do have, you know, reasonable amounts of outside of London members on that list, and we've got an ambition to increase the amount of work that we do outside of London. I mean, we're quite lucky in that we're quite well established. We're quite a known brand around cultural and ethnic diversity, and so a lot of artists come to us. In fact, they're beating down our doors some of the time. But that said, it's also about regional and socio-economic diversity as well, and you know, you you might get a culturally diverse artist who's still a kind of middle-class educated graduate who thinks of themselves as an artist. Actually, where's the next kind of is-she-din taxi driver playwright going to come from? And actually that came through a very bespoke outreach project around Oldham Coliseum. So it's important to us to keep doing that. It's hard in the current funding climate to keep diverting resources to that because we've got turnover. We're small, got turnover about £500,000 a year. In all the sort of GLA and Arts Council funding cuts and standstill funding, when you take inflation into account, we've absorbed around an £80,000 a year drop since 2009. And do the maths, that's a lot. I mean, we do what we can, and actually we've been lucky to have be the recipient of a large one of the big Arts Council diversity funds, which they announced at the start of this year. Sustained Theatre, we've been a recipient of that. We've curated a network of 7 non-London regional venues to become a new sort of touring network, each of whom will host a full-time BAME associate producer who will be part of the senior management team. So the grant that we've got includes 4 full-time salaries and production funds for 4 of those posts, and a remit to offer a kind of suite of artist development opportunities in that region where they're based, and also to sit in on programming meetings and interrogate those theatres' programming and creative operation decisions with a diversity lens. To come back to your original question, we don't focus on diversity specifically. I mean, we're open to that if the right opportunity comes along. There's other companies of our scale where that's much more their specialism, and we are in touch with them in a loose sort of way. I remember Grey Ice is on board, for example. The new current cohort actually of Tamasha playwrights, there's one wheelchair user, and we're looking forward to seeing what she develops with us. So we're open to it, but it's not the main focus probably.
I think because of the work that I do through the hospice, I've come a lot more in contact recently, creating work around disability. And there's just one particular example that I'll give because it's quite exciting. So I'm designing a big flow for the New Year's parade, and there's a big choir, and so I'm working with a group of young adults who are severely disabled, life-limiting illness, and are wheelchair bound, but quite complex and big motorized wheelchairs. And they're going to be involved in the flow, and we're sort of, and there's going to be there's costumes and props and puppetry, and that's really exciting. So I'm doing puppetry and wheelchair users. Yeah, and I have an amazing puppeteer working with me, and one of them, is actually getting like things attached to the wheels that are kinetic, and yeah, it's all really quite exciting, and also like risky, really risky. I mean, we did a project with one of the art therapists with a giant canvas and paint, and the wheelchair user kind of went through the paint and rolled around and made this big abstract expressions thing, and then they're kind of cleaning the paint off the wheels, like the nurse is going to kill this, But those things are actually really, they can be really liberating, and create a kind of new sense of what is the work that you create.
And there's a new aesthetic that emerges from that as well, I guess is what you were saying before. Okay, I think maybe we should open to the floor, and if there's any questions that are from people. Well, I guess thank you very much for the conversation so far. I've got lots of other things I want to ask, but I feel like I'm monopolizing the questions. So I'd like to see if there's any. Abel is sort of like, yeah, agreeing with me. Yes, you are monopolizing. So
I'd like to start with a practical question for Pippa. I'd like you to say more about translation, because to hear in terms of numbers. So basically, how many translations are usually commissioned, and whether, for instance, in the mission commitment from the Royal Shakespeare Company to look for new authors means also looking for new translators, and if there's a sort of form of bursaries or support help for translators. I'm saying this, sorry to interrupt you, because we have quite a few MA literary translation students, and we'd be happy to hear about what you actually do,
Absolutely.
including a Chinese translator as well.
Senior authors.
Everyone as well.
Yeah, the current focus is on that project. And what's interesting about that project is that it's, because it's a cultural exchange, it's two ways. So we're looking at translating the whole of Shakespeare's folio, so all of his plays, into modern Chinese, of which there are already many versions, but what's unique about this project is that we're interested in those translations being speakable for actors. So what we've been doing is embedding translators in the rehearsal room so they can learn with the director and with the actors how to read some of those clues into the verse, which we're hoping will have a particular impact on whether they choose to translate into modern Chinese. And the other way is classical Chinese stories into English. For our stages, but also it's part of it is a legacy project which is providing, we hope, a large quantity, a body of translations of those classical Chinese dramas. A lot of them are operas as well, so that they are base texts, which will be freely available for other theatre companies and other people to pick up and have access to. So that's the main project that we're focused on in terms of translation. But that said, we are also interested in commissioning translations from time to time. And sometimes that will be looking at translations of the classical rep. So we'll be looking at Greeks. We'll be looking at refreshing versions. And those are all brand new commissions inspired by, in close collaboration with the original text. And sometimes it will be slightly more removed. So I'm working on Marlowe's version of Darby and Inez for next year, and obviously we want to look at the Virgil as well. So we'll be working with some classics translators too to have a dig around in the original text. It's quite broad, essentially. The company's international commitment is something that we're developing. When I first joined the company, right at the end of 2008, we had two main stage translations on at the RSC, the Dramas by the Jankow brothers and the Grain Story by Natalia Voshvit. And that's a project that I came into right at the end, but it was really fascinating to me because, again, it was a very close collaboration between the originators, the original authors, and the translators, and they worked together, they worked quite closely together. Nina Rain and Alison Nielsen worked on those two plays. So it is quite broad, and it runs from the new work right the way through to the classical rep. But this project, this cultural exchange with China, is taking up quite a lot of focus at the moment. That's a 9-year project. So, because there are a lot of Shakespeare's plays to translate, and it turns out a lot of classical stories from China to come back the other way. So I think that's going to keep us quite busy, but that's not to say it's the only focus.
Are there any other Tamasha plays sort of translated into Urdu, for example?
Perhaps. I'd have to ask my predecessors about which ones and when it was. It would have been some time ago. Okay. One thing that we do come up against is about using more than one language in a single play. And that's quite complicated. I mean, it's something that obviously makes dramaturgical sense when there's characters from those, backgrounds meeting. So Made in India, this forthcoming show that I've mentioned, has long sections of Gujarati alongside English. And we debated long and hard, and I've actually been involved with the development of that show. I brought it to Tamasha via a scheme I used to be involved with called the Dr. Playwright Award, which it won, and so it had various readings during that. And what we found during that process is that English-speaking audiences get really cross if there's other languages in the play, because they feel excluded. And they tap you on the shoulder afterwards, and they say, I didn't understand that, how dare you exclude me from the play? And actually, in that context, it was around this Western woman going to the clinic and actually having the other two characters have conversations in Gujarati in front of her which she can't understand, and then the doctor tries to translate because the village girl can't speak English, and it's clear that she's mistranslating, and so it's sort of trying to put the audience in the same position as that character. But they hate it. They're really angry, really irrationally angry about it. And so we kind of turned over, it's quite, when you're operating on our scale, things like titles are a bit unaffordable and very technically complicated anyway. So we've come up with the kind of analog solution, which is that they speak with English accents to one another when they're speaking their native tongue. And then when they're speaking in English as a second language, they have accents if they have Indian accents. And in readings and development workshops so far, it seems to be working. But certainly there is a tradition of the company of putting different languages on stage. And it's lovely when it works when you do it in a, with a very diverse audience, because there's a joke in Gujarati or Hindi and half the audience laughs and half are looking around going, oh. So, that's always fun to play.
Any other questions from the floor? Yeah.
Hi. I've got a couple of questions. My first one is, it's for you at the end. Do you feel like certain theatre companies take on other people from different backgrounds just so it looks good for the funding?
I mean, is it ticking boxes?
Yeah, so it's ticking boxes so it looks diverse.
Well,
yeah.
My experience is that my background is that I used to be the literary manager at Payne's Plan Theatre Company, which is a very small theatre company. Was then, when I was there were only 5 of us. You never take on an artist unless you genuinely think you're either going to produce their play or you're going to get them to the next stage in their career. Firstly, because it's pointless. You can't afford to. I have to spend an awful lot of time with the artists that I'm working with, and if I'm working with someone who I just don't have a rapport with, or I can't help them in any way, or the dialogue isn't even or isn't working, there's no point. So you don't tend to foster relationships with artists unless you like each other. It's a bit like a long, slow courtship. And you start off quite flirtatious, and then eventually it gets better and better and better, and you end up in bed, and then it's brilliant, and then maybe you might get married. Or not. But usually it's quite a sort of long, slow process, and it lasts often a number of years, and it's rare to get, certainly even when I was at Payne's Plan, it was rare to get a script or an introduction to a writer that you would then straight away you program. So it's normally quite a long relationship. So I don't have any experience of that, and I don't have any experience of that at the RSC either. Certainly with the RSC, again, we don't tend to foster relationships with artists unless they want, it's mutual. So it has to be a mutual flirtation. No one wants to hang out with someone that they think is just using them. And certainly I don't want to spend time developing an artist if I don't think that we're going to get at least to first base, generally. But I don't know. Does anyone else in the panel have experience of, or suspicions that they might be in any way?
The way I've seen it is changed now. Now it's really different. But years ago, when Arts Council funded had shifted in that you had to show diversity in your application, I know for a fact that what was happening was a lot of bigger companies were putting that under education. So education was their outreach component, and it hit minority, disabled, blah blah blah. You could just stick everything under education, and then you could run a few education workshops. You could collect the money, and then you could really just put it into your show. That was happening.
And your show would still be all white,
but that's changed. Yeah. That's changed. That used to be like that because I think companies didn't know how to start integrating it into their. I think nowadays it's the net is a bit wider.
And I think people in the various identity groups that you've mentioned became savvy to it as well, in the sense that they're saying, okay, you need a Brazilian guy, pick me, and I'll play the Brazilian, and that's okay. So,
but also it got relegated to education and community and participation, and as opposed to being the main thing. I think it's more blurred now, but I think it started a bit like that.
You said you had 2 questions.
Yeah, I've got a couple more. Okay, my next one is, why do you think there isn't enough shows about people from different backgrounds and stuff like mainstream theatre? That makes sense.
Looking at you.
Why do you think there isn't? I feel because I was thinking about this today actually, and I feel like we need to not only be the actors, but we need to be the writers, we need to be the directors, we need to be the producers. And I also feel like what you do in your company is great because you open that door to people to feel like, oh, I can actually do this. When before it's loads of people felt like this isn't for me or I wouldn't be accepted. So I feel like we need to not just put ourselves in a box and just say, all I can do is be the performer, all I can do is play this role and fit.
And wait for somebody to cast you.
Yeah, that's why I created my piece as well, because I need to write my own stories. They're writing their stories, so I need to write my own. And for me to see myself or see people like me or just see diversity on the screens, on the theatre, we need to make it. We can't just expect them to now, we can't expect them to tell our stories. We need to.
It should be mutual though, shouldn't it?
It should, but
you know, so surely, you know, that it's done. It's not your responsibility to make us notice. But it's just got to be joint, hasn't it? Like that's not fair either, is it?
It's not fair, but I feel like that's the reality.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
I hope
until it.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, it just until it changes, until it is that dialogue, we need to create it.
And need to be commissioning creative writers and so on
Yeah.
as well, which is what
It
you guys
reminds
do.
me of a point you made right at the start, Marcelo, which is about your socio-economic background. You know, writing a play or devising a play or setting up a theatre company and creating good work is really, really hard. And it takes a lifetime to learn that craft, or at least a very, very long time, years and years, right? And almost all of us start out doing that in a very ad hoc, part-time way while we do something else. And if you aren't lucky enough to be the tiny minority who have very early success in your career, who are the ones who can keep plugging away at that for no pay and can keep getting the experience and can keep applying for the low and no paid sort of schemes and breaks and short nights and whatever else? And eventually, you know, you get responsibilities, you want to have a normal life, you want to have a mortgage and kids, and before you know it, life takes over and you're a social worker or something. You know, but what I mean is the day job is always the kind of drain. And actually, you know, in order to, if you just look at the socioeconomics of who can sustain practicing their craft, then that automatically imposes a natural sort of economic filter on who kind of ends up on those big main stages, because those people have years and years and years of other stuff. You know, that's just the tip of what the latest big success. So that's where I think there's just really, we're getting better at it, but there's just not the support and the funding to really seed and sustain the people from the sort of multiplicity of backgrounds that would eventually, it's a very complex ecosystem, the theatre industry, and those stages are a very long road and very few people can sustain it, sadly.
There's a question coming from the end of the room.
I just want to look at a little bit more at the politics which some people have talked about, have alluded to about this. The question of diversity, I'm sure there would be a consensus in this room that diversity in itself, in the arts and in society as a whole, is a good thing. We want to have a diverse society, we want to have a diverse range of viewpoints, range of perspectives on life, and to learn a lot from them. I'm not sure how much that is changing. That's part of my question, because since the summer, I think the atmosphere in this country is beginning to change, and part of my question to you is about how you perceive that change happening and what sort of strategies we should be using to counter that change. The other thing is about since if diversity is a good thing in itself, we want diversity of creators, diversity of audiences. We want theatre and the arts to be something that embraces the whole of our communities. our many communities. One of the problems with the political way of looking at this is that there is a possibility that we then ghettoise different communities, and we say, you know, if you're South American, that's what you should be writing about, the politics there. You know, Irish writers have, during the time of the Troubles, the Irish writers should have been writing about the Troubles and so on. And how do we move people towards a position where things can be very political, but you're not ghettoised into just writing about a particular issue that is the issue of your community. And the third part is about diversity of class. How do we get working class people as well into theatre? And it seems to me that Finn the strategy of working with schools is a very strong and powerful one in order to get past that really middle class audience that we have in most theatre. So those are the questions.
So three-part question really. One to do with the current climate and how do we as artists contribute to countering this change of tone in the overall political and public discourse around diversity. The second part has to do with ghetto and ghettoizing and just speaking to ourselves about ourselves, and the third part to do with class, right? So who wants to tackle which?
Talk about the first part.
Talk about the first part, go on.
I think it has been really very tense socially in the UK since the Brexit vote. It's been quite, I think what it did is it empowered a very dark part of people who felt the effects of austerity and were blaming the wrong people, in my opinion. And I've witnessed it firsthand. I think it's been really tricky. But I also think that when we live through times like these, is actually when we produce amazing work. If you are an artist and you believe that you sit within the realm of diversity, or you feel like you want to see diversity represented, there's no better time to create work than today, really. There's a piece up at Battersea Arts Centre called London Stories. This walk-through, site-specific piece of people telling their story for 8 minutes, all sorts of different stories. And I thought this is a prime example of very simple creative ways you can counteract the dominant narrative creatively. And that is the almost verbatim piece of theatre with non-actors. And I thought, that's fantastic. This is exactly what needs to happen. So actually, I think that, when things are at their worst socially and politically is when the arts are at their best in some ways, because that's real fuel, and you can really counteract things. And it's a real, I would say we should see it as a calling and an opportunity to be creative and be stronger.
So how do we do that without just talking to ourselves and move out of the ghetto?
It's quite interesting. The Brexit vote happened when we were in rehearsal for the 2 inaugural opening shows at the other place in Stratford. The other place was set up by Buzz, Goodbody, a pioneering radical woman. The first paid female director in the UK, Buzz. And so it's been quite emotional reopening the other place. And we were in rehearsal for 2 plays, one by Somalia Seaton called Fall of the Kingdom, Fall of the Kingdom, Rise of the Foot Soldier, which was came out of the provocation that she gave herself, which is the British white middle class are more dangerous than the far right. And that was the question that she was asking in that play. And the other play was by Fraser Grace, who's quite an established playwright, who was writing a play about fear and terrorism and what it might feel like if London became Aleppo, what it might feel like to watch everything you know be destroyed. And what was really fascinating about it was that they all lost their nerve about week 2.5 in rehearsal just after Brexit. They all began to feel really, they really stuck out. You know, walking around Stratford, which largely voted exit Brexit. They began to feel quite vulnerable, and it was really, really fascinating because what happened was that we opened the shows and we had this amazing mixture in terms of the audience, which is unknown quantity to us. The other place has been closed for 10 years. So we didn't know who was going to come, and we were, you know, obviously marketing through our usual channels, but also in response to the kind of work that we were programming. And we'd said it was going to be provocative, and what was very interesting was that we got a real mixture, a really diverse audience that came. And what happened was that they started talking to each other. Yeah. Which was really fascinating, because these plays were playing as a double bill, so there's an interval in the middle where you all had to sort of bundle into the part. And that was really fascinating. That was really fascinating, because it's exactly what you're saying. It's looking at the issues head on and going, okay, well, you know, here is our older, whiter, middle class audience who know the RSC and come from the, 50 miles away from where we are, Stratford-upon-Avon in Warwickshire. And here is a different audience who are coming to see Somali's work. Nadia Latif directed it, coming to see Nadia's work, coming from actually not out of that, but from Birmingham. So a bit of the Midlands that, we're always trying to get people to come over to Stratford. And what happened was basically largely debate, really, really interesting and interested and debate. It was fascinating. It was really fascinating. So I totally agree.
You reminded me of that week we were doing a writing intensive week through. Two of the graduates of our writers group were running a writing intensive week for the writing group at Cheltenham Everyman. And the Brexit vote took place on the Thursday of that week. And this was running from kind of a Tuesday to sort of Sunday. And it was, I drove out to support them a couple of times, and it was, you drive down out of London and you get all the red signs in the farmers fields and leave, and you're like, okay, we're not in Kansas anymore. And then, you sort of get there and it's just, it never really came up as a subject. It was sort of obliquely referred to because one of the sessions was on the day of the vote, But actually, what the actual project we were delivering was about was brilliant timeliness, was about how do you write about experience and worlds and people very unlike yourself. And the experience that we structured for those writers, which wasn't exclusively white, mostly middle class and largely middle-aged writers group, of varying levels of experience, was we through in conjunction with the Theatres Outreach Department, our writing tutors managed to curate, they brought in, the writers got to spend one-to-one time interviewing people from different local organisations, one of which was a refugee charity, one of which was a homeless charity, and these were real people who'd really experienced migration stories and other kinds of hardships. And the sessions that we did up to that point was about how do you go about unpacking someone else's experience and acquiring the kind of seriously deep emotional understanding and legitimacy and authenticity to sort of write something about that experience, which is theirs. Which is something that I've done at university level and other places. I always get interested in subjects beyond my own life, and so I had to develop my own practice in that way. And the best of these were written, and then the best of them were taken forward and presented at the Stroud Theatre Festival. Now Brexit was just sort of hovering over it all. It didn't necessarily come up, but actually it struck me at the time that actually, my God, that's a way we can use our skills to actually bring, people, like you said, that they start talking to each other. Yes. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I've kind of read about people like you in the news. But when else does life bring you into contact with them? And that we can, I think, curate those experiences.
And that sort of cuts across class as well, which is the kind of third element of the question there. And you were talking about different audiences, that you had your Scarborough audiences, which seem to be kind of white middle class educated, and the London audiences as well. So is that I guess the question is a double one. It has to do with this ghetto idea, but also reaching out and encountering people that you wouldn't normally encounter with your audiences.
Because I was just thinking now, how would you actually write another person's story? And you've answered it for me, but you have to collaborate with them. You can't go by yourself in a corner and start thinking about what they're writing about their own experiences. You have to reach out to them. You have to connect with them.
Dialogue.
Yeah, and that's what you were talking about creating a dialogue, and that's what you really have to do. And you can't be. We shouldn't be afraid to do it either. We shouldn't be afraid to go to the unknown as
Which
well.
should be quite provocative, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's our job.
Exactly.
I talk a lot in my writers group about what is the social function of the playwright. And of course there's going to be very personal plays written, and often the first 1 or 2 or 3 plays that a writer might write are very much from their own life or experience or family or whatever. Personally, I've never delved down particularly into myself in that way. I've just not had a particularly interesting life. But also I'm just get much more excited by subjects that are sort of over there. It's really about what we don't really have sort of paid up public thinkers anymore outside of really artists. Artists are that, we don't sort of have public intellectuals in the kind of European tradition. And really actually the live nature of theatre, we don't particularly attend large-scale political meetings and rallies anymore. The organised religion is in decline, but we still come together in theatres collectively to consider the issues of the day. And when it works well, people from all walks of life. And that gives us an extraordinary kind of social function, I think. And writers, given that it sort of all starts with us in the text-based tradition anyway, we decide whose lives are worth putting a frame around and what ends up on that stage. And that's an extraordinary responsibility, particularly in the subsidised sector where a good amount of your fee is going to come from public taxes, ultimately.
Taxpayers' money.
Well, there's a question. I do think that comes with a responsibility, and I like to sort of put that on the table in front of writers. What are the taxpayers getting for their money? What is the public getting for their money? Yeah, fine if you want to write about your ex-wife, but really, what else? And so I really encourage writers to play that social function, and I think that I hope you're right that we'll see more art of that kind now, and I suppose the nearest comparison point might be the 80s Tamasha and the kind of political work that came out of that. So maybe we'll see a resurgence.
I'm very conscious of time, so we have time perhaps for one last question, and then there are some refreshments there which we booked, some crisps and things to make people. So now I've put the last question between you and the crisps, and that might be. But is there any other last question that you'd like to ask?
I have a question for Pina. I mean, it's still, of course, about counteracting, subversion, provoking, and so on. So I'd like to hear very briefly something about your play, How to Disappear Completely and Never Be Found. Because, my reading of it is that it's definitely maybe an attack against dominant narratives, maybe the concept itself of diversity. So you are basically asking for the right for not being.
That's a profound one to end on. Yeah, it's quite. Are you asking me what the play is ultimately about?
Well, to some extent, yes. It would be nice to hear. Although I'm very conscious about the time, but still, I think that this all the discussion about diversity that was highlighted before, Galilean as well, sometimes forces people into ghettos. So I found the reflection in your play in which you are someone that doesn't want to be. He has a part in society, he plays a role, but then he decides not to be that anymore. And sometimes maybe with diversity we feel obliged to, or at least we feel that we need to express a sense of belonging, to belong somewhere. And I don't know whether it's clear what I mean, but...
Yes, it is. I'm not sure what the question is, but those are all accurate observations of the play. I slightly resist kind of going, the play's about this, there you go. Because actually, art's more complicated than that.
Yeah, of course.
You put it out
in the world, it's sort of provocation.
It takes on its own life of its own.
Because I find the impression that you didn't go for a topic, for instance, that was focusing heavily on a certain class or whatever. It was someone that wanted actually to go out from you know.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say it's a diverse play in the sense we've been talking about this evening. It's still the white guy. You know, there's something. It's kind of a play in the existential tradition. Yeah, I would say it does interrogate what makes you who you are anyway, and so identity is at the heart of it. I'm not sure it comes up with any answers, but it kind of enjoys the ride.
May I suggest that this might be an instant conversation over crisps?
Yes.
But I do think that this idea of you having an identity and choosing either to share that identity, as in the case of what you did in your show, or to try and erase that identity for whatever reason in the play that you've written, is something that is at the heart also of what we're talking about. Whose stories are being told, who's telling them, and who's watching. I'd like you to join me, please, in thanking our panelists for coming in. Our colleagues in the research cluster who have helped us organise this. Ben, also our technician, who's just sneakily trying to walk in, who helped set up the video stream, and Ian and Kay and Abele, who've been helping organise, and all of you who are here. And let's carry on the conversation in corridors, around tables, or wherever you go next. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you so much.